You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. And, of course, here we are, man. It's another Star Wars Friday night. And, obviously, we're reviewing Andor because it's really kind of, hey, Ronaldo's here, like, right out the gate. What's going on, Ronaldo? Actually, Ronaldo, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but did you join our Facebook group, our head-to-head of Star Wars community? Because it looked like the person that joined might have been you, so confirm that for me while I'm introducing all this stuff. And as a reminder for anybody that hasn't, we do have a Facebook community. Might as well get that right. I mean, if I'm talking about it. It's called Head-to-Head of Star Wars Community. It's on Facebook. We've got a small but mighty membership, and we do, if anybody wants to chat on there or continue the discussion that we start on these shows, that's a really good place to do it. And also, that's, even though we have the community tab now, thank goodness on this thing, we do actually update people about what's going on the channel and just in general. So, yeah, you're going to definitely want to check that out. And hey, since I'm in the self-promotion mode here, might as well say, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. If you like what you see tonight, because we are going to get into a lot of really good discussion. Lately, it seems like it's just shows. Star Wars has been doing so many things lately that usually we cover a lot of news, we cover different topics, we talk about a lot of different things on this show. But, I don't know, for the last 11 weeks, it's been Andor on Friday nights, and then, of course, Tales of the Jedi on Monday nights. So, yeah, let's get into this, man. I mean, this episode of Andor I thought was really good. I thought that it was actually really Star Wars-like, more so than a lot of these.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, in the sense of you had a little bit of a space battle, you had some of just the way, some of the drama and stuff like that, it reminded me a little bit more of what they were trying to do with the prequels. Again, with movies, you only have a couple hours to tell an entire story, and then you've got to wait, I don't know how many every years until you get another one.
A year and a half.
Yeah. Whereas television, one of the things that's really cool about this is they can, not only can they draw things out, slow down the pacing and really get into the minutia of a story, but they also have time to develop things. They can develop characters, they can develop plot lines, they can take their time, and once they wrap a season, the next year, if they wanted to, they can introduce another season. So the turnaround's a little bit quicker. Although, one of the things that Tony Gilroy was saying, was it like next, that we might not get season 2 for a long time or something? I mean, I could have sworn he said something like,
a bit of a wait.
Yeah,
2024, maybe.
Maybe, yeah. And you want them to do it right. So, as what's funny was I actually watched the episode this morning before work, because it was one of those things where, and I was right. I'm like, I might not have time after work. And the worst thing that you can do when you're hosting a show like this is doing a review of an episode that you haven't seen. I mean, I must confess, in the interest of transparency, I have done that before. I have faked it a few times. But generally speaking, that's not really... It's a little bit disingenuous to do to the audience, I think, to try to review something you haven't seen. So, made sure that I actually watched it this morning. And, yeah, I mean, it was really cool. Again, we are now entering into this 2-part finale thing that's going on, right? Because, as we stated, this show has been divided into several trilogies. 1, 2, and 3 was a story arc. Episodes 4, 5, and 6 was another story arc. 7 was a standalone. 8, 9, and 10, of course, we just got done reviewing. Was last week we did the final episode of the prison story arc. And now we're going into episodes 11 and 12, which are the last 2 episodes, and that's the finale. So I thought, I don't know. I mean, I thought it was a really good start to the finale. I think that they were really starting to delve into a lot of different things that I can see them carrying over into season 2, but then also into the next episode.
I wasn't that completely enthralled with this episode. I mean, I know it's kind of setting up the finale, but I wanted, I guess, a little bit. I mean, it gave me a little bit with the whole Luthen thing. That was
Mm-hmm.
cool.
Yep.
But Andor himself, though, uh, I really didn't get much from from him as far as like where they're going next, what's the next move for him. And Mon Mothma's, she had a very emotional scene, so I thought that was kind of cool. And it was a little it's this episode still kind of felt confusing a little bit to me. Like it had some things where I just didn't quite know, like, where we were going. No Deidre this episode,
It was
really.
Deidre.
So,
Well,
well, I mean, we had her, but I mean, it's
I
not
know what
like,
you mean. I know it wasn't like
yeah,
a... Well, because
we
some of
didn't
the
focus.
things, you know how like we always do that, what do we want to see in the next episode kind of thing?
Hmm.
One of the things that I think both of us had on the list last week was we wanted to see more of that whole Deidre Cyril vibe going.
Yeah,
Now, we did get scenes with
exactly.
both of them, but not both of them together, and certainly not both of them interacting in the way that we wanted. Because they set up
Hmm.
this whole, like, little possible
Weird.
romantic, weird relationship thing, and that was never paid off. But that goes into what I was saying earlier, where I'm thinking they might be setting some things up for season 2.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool. Or we could be seeing some things for maybe the finale. They
Yeah.
could be saving it for the finale. Like, okay, build some big. We're gonna get a cliffhanger. It's just, what is it?
Well,
um,
I will say this: the finale is going to be the longest episode of this season thus far. So I'm sorry, not
Actually, of
season.
any Star Wars um
Yes,
series.
yes, that's true. That is true. It did. They talked about that where it is a little bit. Yeah, it's a little bit longer, but I think thus far it was episode 5 or 8 or one of those, whatever the first. Well, I guess it was 8. That was like 53 minutes or something, and then this one's going to be like 54 minutes and something.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
there's room for some storytelling in a 54-minute episode.
yeah. But I think with a lot of different. That's the thing is with a lot of different characters that we have. With Luthen, with Cyril, with Deidre, with Andor, with all these different people. We're following a bunch of different people, which I like. It's cool, but in a way, it's like everybody's story isn't going to be wrapped up. So it's kind of like, who are they going to really pick? I mean, of course, it should be Andor because it's his show, but
Mm-hmm.
like in concert with that, what are we going to get, or who are we going to get? Is probably the more important question.
Well, Dwight says, I think it was a great setup for episode 12 in season 2. Um, I would agree with that. I mean, I would think that one of the things we have to keep in mind for this is that for this particular episode, maybe this is going to carry over into the next, I don't know, but themes are more important in this than the plot points. It's a lot of the various themes that are explored in this episode that I think are really what are front and center, which of course we'll get into a little bit later. But I think that that's one thing you definitely have to keep in mind for this. And then, we had said that Luthen, I think we can agree, was a beast in this episode.
Yeah, definitely.
In fact, I would say that his scene toward the end and the ship and all that stuff, that was probably my favorite scene of this episode.
Hmm.
But,
Oh yeah, hands down for me.
I mean, the Vel and Mothma moment I thought were really cool too. I mean, there's like a lot of points. And of course, I didn't actually, I did the notes thing a little bit differently this time. what I was doing before when I would take notes on it, whether I had to do it on the first viewing or the more preferred way, which is I would watch it basically to take in the episode first, and then I would go back on a second viewing and then do the notes. But before, what I would do is I would go in, and every time there was a scene change, right? That's the start of a new bullet point or something. So I would kind of comment on the show scene by scene by scene. This time, what I chose to do, because again, I knew that this was going to be the only time that I was going to be able to watch it, was this morning, and I didn't really want to do what I had been doing before. I allowed myself to watch the entire episode and then go back and put the notes that really stood out to me. So as a result, it's not quite as note heavy. And then Ronaldo's got a couple comments here. He says, with this episode, Luthen is my favorite character, and he's now in my top 10. And I have to agree. And then, of course, he goes on to say, yeah, I'm in the group. So he was the one that did join our Star Wars head-to-head, or head-to-head of Star Wars community. I don't know why I can never get the name of our own group straight, but... So again, I mean, it is a really good thing. And then, of course... This is something I was going to address later, but, you know, this is not a linear review by any stretch of the imagination. It's a discussion, so, you know, feel free, guys, to cover any part of this episode that you want, and, you know, we'll just skip to it and talk about it now. And Ronaldo starts us out. He goes, do you agree the Luthen stick looks like a lightsaber? He's talking about when his ship escapes, that tractor beam... It was like these two beams came out. It looked very much like a lightsaber, like almost like a Darth Maul kind of thing. And then he spun his ship around and he sliced into the TIE fighters, which I thought was spectacular. Yeah, absolutely spectacular. And that is exactly what it reminded me of, actually. I thought that, I was like, man, are they using kyber crystals in ships now?
I mean, well, you think about it. I mean, it may not be that far off, because if you think about it, one, kyber crystals used in the Death Star, and at the very beginning, that's what he gave Andor when he got to what's that? And was it Andril and the place where they did the heist?
Oh, Aldhani.
Aldhani, yeah. Yeah, when he gave him that necklace, that was kyber crystal.
Well, yeah, the necklace was. Dwight says,
so that's what...
he says, Luthen's stick I found is actually a knife. He's like, put it down or give it back. I mean, it could be. I mean, look, the whole kyber crystal thing, I think they have to be careful, though, because... Again, this is taking place before Episode 4, and I think it's a really dangerous thing to start front-loading the original trilogy with really cool technology. This is something, and again, y'all know one of us has to make Star Trek references in every one of our Star Wars shows, right? But, you know, this is a thing that's been happening with Star Trek Discovery, and then Strange New Worlds. All these shows that they've been coming out with that actually take place before the original series, you have to start to explain, okay, it's one thing to have everything looking cooler, right? Like, okay, why does the Discovery Bridge look way more high-tech than the original Enterprise Bridge? And of course, the answer to that is because one was shot in 1966 and the other one in, the 2000s. But that you could just chalk up to, it's the look. The problem, though, with both Discovery and Strange New Worlds is they've been coming up with new technologies that they were using that are way more advanced than anything that was used in the original trilogy. And this is kind of what's been happening with Star Wars in some sense, is that they're expanding the lore, which is fine, but there's a danger in expanding that before the original trilogy, because if you start introducing too much. I mean, I remember something you and I talked about this. Remember when it was probably the Phantom Menace. No, actually it wasn't. It was Attack of the Clones. And you and I were talking about it, and I think it was still in theaters actually, but it might have been, a year or two later. And we were talking about the whole R2D2 jet thing.
Oh yeah.
And it's kind of like, and they ended up having to do it. They ended up having to say, well, by the time of the original trilogy, R2's little jetpack thing or whatever didn't work, and nobody bothered to fix it, and, all this other stuff, because, again, you're bringing this stuff up. It's like, okay, yeah, is it cool to have R2 being able to fly a little bit and stuff? Yeah, but you're now putting something in this that you have to now explain, well, why didn't he do this in, why didn't he do this in Empire Strikes Back when he was in the Dagobah thing? It's like, I mean, there's a lot of times that he could have actually used that.
True. The thing about the technology, and so far, I mean, yeah, you have them using some, of course, cooler technology in these newer shows, obviously for the reasons that you aforementioned. It was done in 1977 versus 2022 or 21 or whenever it was shot. I don't have so much of a problem with the technology, as long as one, it's not given to characters like perfect example you just gave with R2, because you established that he had it in the original, I mean the prequel trilogy, but now he doesn't have it in the original.
Right.
So that's like a continuity thing. It's like, okay, well, why can he do this then but can't do it now? Right. But the other part is, it's just like, as long as it's nothing that's too over the top, like Luthen's thing was cool and it made sense for his ship to be that way, because he's a spy basically, or he's kind of like this counterintelligence kind of person. So essentially Luthen was pulling this whole, he had a James Bond spaceship basically, like, how Q will always have these little gadgets and stuff. I mean, that's essentially what he had. He had countermeasures for, okay, in case I get trapped out here. I mean, it made sense for Luthen to have things
Well,
like that, because it's like he never knows what situation he's going to run himself into. So
no, that's actually
that's
an
a little bit
Easter
more
egg.
believable.
Yeah,
That's a little bit more believable to
the
me.
tractor beam one, for instance, when he sent out all that shrapnel and stuff. That was actually explained in some official Star Wars thing that I read earlier, that because he's wealthy, like a lot of pirates and smugglers would have some of this stuff, but it's sort of like, if you're wealthy enough, you could afford to have these countermeasures where,
Sure.
not everybody was wealthy enough to do that. Like, say, Han Solo, for instance.
Right.
So yeah, you're right. I mean, from that standpoint, sure, there's gonna be something, and you're right. I mean, if it's a continuity thing, if it's the same character. If it's not, you can let that go. But one of the things that I'm thinking of in particular is that whole like little lightsaber thing that comes out of the ship. I mean, you got to be careful with stuff like that, man, because why wouldn't you have that? I mean, and if you got people like Luthen and all these people, and obviously you look at the Rebel fleet, it wasn't like they were hurting for cash. They had cash. I'm thinking you probably could have used that.
Not till later, though. Not till later. And like I said, it's a ship thing.
Later
though.
is what I'm talking about, though.
Well, I'm saying it's a ship thing, though. Like, okay.
Well, but it's a technology thing. I mean, if I've got something like a feature that's in a Cadillac, generally speaking, you can get it. I mean, it might not be, from the same manufacturer or whatever, but you can. I'm just saying, well, you get a lot of those ships then. I mean, Luthen really clearly didn't have a problem taking out a bunch of TIE fighters by himself, I might add. He actually, you could argue he had a better shot at it than the Falcon. And I get it, the Falcon's like a big hunk of junk, and, it's just like a normal YT freighter that Solo modified.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like they're modifications that were made to these ships for specific purposes. So for Luthen, for his what he does, it made sense for him to have those modifications. Han had stuff that was made for smuggling because that was his profession. So
Yeah, but I'm talking
that's
about
what I'm
like
saying.
stuff like X-wings and stuff like that. And I mean, I guess you could say, well, you know, you can't put those. I'm thinking that whatever ship I would need that would essentially give me lightsabers in space that I can cut through ships, I'm probably going to order those ships maybe. Or at least a few of them. You had X-wings, Y-wings, A-wings, B-wings. I'm thinking get whatever, you know, whatever ship has lightsabers attached to it. I don't know, maybe order a few hundred of those, and you know what? That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm saying. You got to be careful.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I could also make an argument against that too, but
We all can because
that's
we're
not what
Star
we're
Wars fans, right?
but yeah, but you know, that's not what we're here tonight. We're here to talk about Andor.
Well, we are
So,
talking about Andor.
I mean, we
So
are
let's.
talking
Well,
about
all right,
Andor,
all
but
right, all right, and then I get it. In the interest of putting this thing back on Andor, let's go to Dwight's comment. He says, "What did you guys think about the funny talking alien fishermen? There's a funny story behind those guys. They went from thinking about getting 1,000 credits per to helping them fly off the planet. The one dude with the little like Cyclops eyepiece, he actually appears in." I think it's Rogue One. But I read about it. It's like it's not just that species, but that specific character, because that species has no real love for the Empire. But that guy ended up appearing later on. He's one of those. If you guys go and you start searching for Easter eggs from this episode, that's one of them. So Ronaldo, of course, should come as no shock because we spent a bunch of time on this thing that we got a comments, you know, about that. He's like, I also don't have issues with it. I guess I disconnect my brain and think, well, it looks cool, and I just forget about it. And look, ultimately, that's what you have to do, right? Because you have to understand when a franchise is as old as Star Wars is, and it's been going on for a while, if you're going to choose to deal with technology or stories or whatever it is that take place before a particular film. Like in the case of A New Hope, it was made in 1977. So really, the only two options you have are like, okay, do we not tell any stories that happened before, or do we just tell the stories, put in the really cool, super cool things that we got? I mean, you gotta give them a little bit of leeway to do that. All I'm saying is, but you don't have to go out of your way, though, to introduce something that you're gonna have to explain later. That's all.
I got you.
Ronaldo says, it's like the look of aliens in TV or film. Aliens from the 60s and 70s look different from the ones we have today. Well, again, it's funny that you bring that up because in Star Trek, well, I'm really going heavy with the Star Trek references today. So in the original series, the Klingons looked vastly different than they looked in the movies that they eventually made, like Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3, and so on and so on. And they obviously had to explain it because they were vastly different. And obviously, it was the limitations of a television budget. That's the real reason. But what they did was they just started to say, well, you know, this is kind of like a different, you know, like tribe or kind of like how people on Earth look different, you know. So that was kind of how they explained it. And yeah, you could do that. And of course, Ronaldo goes on to say, for example, he brought that up. I swear I did not read this comment ahead of time. Otherwise, I might not have started out this. He says, for example, look how different the Klingons look today compared to the way they did in the past. Change from one series to the other. And you're right. There's the classic Klingons, too, from the Star Trek films. And then, for Discovery in particular, they changed them yet again. So, and this is what I'm saying, as technology evolves and as production and everything evolve and you have new opportunities, then you can do things. But I guess what I'm saying is changing things just for the sake of changing them because you can, because the technology exists or whatever, I think is a little dangerous. And again, it's going to cause you to have to explain. But if there's some really deep storytelling thing that you just feel you have to get out, then okay, it is what it is.
Definitely. What did you think about Mon Mothma this episode?
Well, let's see what I said in my notes. um I only want to do that because I mean, basically I thought so the conversation between Mon Mothma and Vel obviously is incredible, and I think that really what this came down to, because every one of these conversations is character development and stuff like that, but one of the main themes, I said we would get to this eventually, sacrifice. That's one of the main themes of this episode. And
or the whole series, actually. Well, show.
yeah, but I mean, and that's true. But I think that in the past episodes, you had to focus more on the plot points because you had to understand where these characters all fit into the bigger franchise and what was going on. Now that we basically have a handle on the characters, the stories, and what's happening, it seems to me like now they're actually developing the themes. Or they're taking, like you said, the themes that pretty much go across this whole show, but now they're dealing with them specifically. Because this conversation between Vel and Mothma, this is the first time that Vel, we're talking in-universe now here, this is the first time that Vel actually realizes what Mothma is really giving up. And just because up until now, Vel always assumed that, hey, I'm the boots on the ground. I'm the one that's actually carrying this stuff out. You know, you're talking, trying to network with people, whatever. I'm the one actually out there with a blaster in my hand trying to make all this stuff happen. What are you doing? Mm-hmm. And in a couple episodes back, when you look at what Vel was saying, like, hey, you're not taking enough action. You're just, you know, she didn't really understand what Mothma was really doing, like what her real role in this rebellion was. It kind of reminded me of course, just that quick, I forgot the guy's name, but the mole dude that was that supervisor.
The one that was talking to Luthen.
Yeah, because, you know, his whole thing was like, okay, you know, I'm giving up this whole thing with time with my daughter and all this other stuff. You know, what are you giving up? I mean, Luthen just
went off, basically.
Puts it all out there, man. Like, you know, making him just think like, okay, you know, I'm not diminishing what you're saying, but here's what I'm giving up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you see this played out actually with several of the conversations, because first you had the Vel and Mon Mothma thing where you had this whole situation where Vel really realizes everything that Mon has on the line and how it's way more vast than even what Vel's doing. Then you have the conversation between it was that the assistant in Luthen's shop with was that with Vel too?
Yeah.
Because it was one of those things where, you know, once again, she was kind of getting up in her face and, you know,
they want to follow the whole sneaky coded protocol.
Yeah. And, you know, basically I can't remember the assistant's name either, but the assistant that, you know, everybody thought was Leia, but it's not. But that person was just kind of like, okay, look, yeah, you're on this mission during this time. I'm doing this stuff all the time. You're like one little component. You're one little cog in this big machine that I'm actually managing. So you need to kind of back off with the attitude, you know? And I thought that was just a fantastic scene because, again, you're looking at each one of these components. I mean, Vel's sacrifice and everything is obvious. You know, the people, the soldiers that are out there actually doing the work, it's obvious what they're doing. It's obvious what they're giving up. But it's contrasted and compared to what you would think maybe would be the more higher ups or like the architects of this rebellion. Because it's the same thing with Luthen and Saw. You know, the whole scene with Luthen and Saw in this episode, you saw that, you know, you saw Saw now understanding that he needs to fit into this bigger picture. Remember in the last episode, we said, wow, Saw is so doing his own thing and he's kind of independent. And yet he eventually becomes a part of the rebellion. I mean, he's still kind of a little bit of a rogue in a sense, but I remember you and I were kind of like, oh, it's going to be interesting to see if they show, well, how does Saw start to get into the mindset of being part of a bigger picture? And we saw that in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, like the conversations, and I'm still wondering what the heck Mon Mothma's daughter was doing, like when they had that little Girl Scout
That
meeting over there.
weird, yeah, man, that like little cult
It's like
thingy,
cult.
like mind head or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, I was
That's
like,
a Bowfinger reference in case nobody got that one, but yeah, I know. Yeah,
was
like
like,
what was
okay,
that all about?
Because she's like, oh, you're letting her do this? And she's like, well,
I
it's
know,
like, it's
man.
a parent thing. And like, well, he's all about it. And
right.
so I'm like, okay, everybody's looking like children of the corn over there. So I'm just
I know,
like,
that was really bizarre. You know?
I was like, okay, this is weird. But so, and that's what I mean. Like, I think a lot of things are transpiring, and like Mothma feels like I feel her slipping. Like she's just like slipping further away, and she needs some sort of support, you know, in this. And I feel bad for her because like financially, like she's depleted basically, and then now the empire is basically looking in or are close to looking into her financials to kind of figure out like, okay, you got like 400,000 credits missing. What are you buying?
Right.
You know,
Right.
you know, um and then on top of that, you know, she doesn't know what Luthen's doing out there. Um Now she's got to make this deal with this guy who basically almost like wants to trade her daughter for services. You know, it's almost like a weird like matchmaking sex trade type thing they got going on over here. So it's just, but she has to do it because it's like, you know, for the good of the order, pretty much.
Yeah,
You know, it's
greater
for
good.
the good of the greater good. You know, and that's the thing she's trying to keep in, you know, in the forefront of her mind. But you know, she's a woman, she's a mother, you know, she's a person, and so she's having all these emotional conflictions.
Again, it's
And
sacrifice. It's
yeah,
all
it's the whole
about,
sacrifice.
that's what I was saying. This whole episode is just going through systematically what everybody's sacrificing. You know?
And then we even get to Andor because ultimately he had to sacrifice Marva, like not intentionally, but you know, he wanted to always try to come back to her and try to, you know, take her away from Ferrix, but you know, she ended up succumbing to her own illness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a
And
really
now,
sad scene. And
yeah.
actually, B, the little droid, his
Oh, yeah, the
whole
little
reaction
droid,
was
yeah.
heartbreaking, man. It's just like,
Yeah, man,
wow,
he's just like, I
dude.
want this.
I know.
Yeah, it's like,
And
'cause
here's
he's almost
another
like a
thing.
kid,
I
you
know
know?
it really was. And again,
That's what
one
it
of the
felt
things,
like.
and that's the thing, I really like the way that they've done this. One of the things I will say that Disney Star Wars has done right. I mean, I'm not saying that Lucas didn't, because Lucas did it too, but obviously he just had the films. There was the Clone Wars, and you saw a little bit of it in that too. But one of the things that they've been doing right, I guess you could just say all across Star Wars, is they do a really good job of giving the droids in Star Wars different personalities and ways in which they react to the environment around them. You know, it's not so uniform. And
Right.
I think that that's a really cool thing that they've done in this whole thing. And of course, B's reaction and the way that he's just even his personality, really, when you look at the whole
Yeah.
series, he's another droid in Star Wars, yes, but he's different.
Yeah, I mean, he's different than 3PO. 3PO's like the proper fussy little, like, okay. He's cool. And they all have their uses too. Like, 3PO is a protocol droid, so he's good at protocol and, figuring out different languages. Excuse me. And, R2 was kind of like the handy droid. He's kind of able to do just about anything mechanical
Yeah.
and work on stuff. He has his own personality. He's a little bit more fiery, just like Chopper. Chopper's the same way. It's kind of like R2, but he's even more
more grouchy.
chippy.
Yeah.
Yeah, more grouchy and chippy than R2. Um, excuse me. And then you also have BB-8, right? BB-8 was kind of cute and he was handy, but he was kind of more of a he's almost like a pet in a way. Like that's how I always kind of view BB-8. Like he was almost like Poe Dameron's little pet.
Yeah.
And then now we have B, who is almost like a little kid. He's just looks at Marvel as mom.
Yeah.
You
and
got
that's
K2SO, who's
and L3, and I mean, it goes on and on. Dio. I mean, there's like so many different droids in this thing, and everyone has their own deal. So let's get to some of these chats. There's a lot of them. Ronaldo basically says, I love Mon in this. She's my second favorite character in this. She's sacrificing all her morals and ethics for the greater good. Yeah, I mean, again, enough can't be said about that. And really, like I said, this is one of the first times that usually you'll see the higher-ups in the rebellion now going through stuff. Usually you see the struggles of the lower ranks, but it's almost like the higher ranks up until this point were somewhat two-dimensional, and now you're seeing that third dimension in each of these characters, which I just think is fantastic. And then, of course, David joins us. Hello, gentlemen. I agree with Daryl. It was a bit anticlimactic. Good overall because it had certain good parts. I think they sacrificed flow for setup. The good parts saved it. I don't know if I necessarily agree that it didn't flow, though. I could see where maybe somebody might say that because you did get, in the beginning, right, you had the whole, like, I guess a continuation of the prison breakout scene where Andor and that other dude were kind of on the cliff.
Cliffhanger, basically.
Right, I guess. A little on the nose, but sure, why not, right? So you get that, and then, of course, they were captured by those two, weird aliens.
Fisherman.
And then they, of course, they had to get off of the planet and go back to the whatever the nice planet was, and he got his credits back and all that. There was a little bit of that, and then it switched back and forth, but I don't know. I thought there was a couple of things to note, though, that were interesting. Like, for instance, a couple of the minor things. We're talking about the Marva scene right now. And then, of course, after that, it basically switches to the Empire, talking about the funeral permit.
Mm-hmm.
Which I loved. I love that we're in a show where the Empire has to deal with permits for them to hold a public funeral. And the fact that they cleverly weaved that in because they were sort of going back and forth on, hey, we don't necessarily, on one hand, the Empire is trying to keep a little bit of a status quo, but they're also trying to remind everybody they're in charge. And so they're going back and forth on this seemingly mundane thing. And that's when Deidre, and this, you alluded to this in the earlier episodes, it's like the only scene we really get of her, honestly, in the whole thing, but she's basically like, yeah, I could draw Andor out. Let's just let him go ahead and have this funeral.
And the fact that the Empire was so nonchalant about it, I was like, I mean, we're going to deny it anyway. Like, let them just, they keep submitting it, but we keep denying. It's just like you just see once again how cold and callous they are. Like, they just really don't care about anybody.
And bureaucratic. It's like they're not involving the emotion, the grieving, all that stuff. To them, it's just a permit request.
Yeah,
they're not
exactly.
really looking at the context of it. They're just like, oh, whatever, we're just going to deny it,
Yeah,
And
they're like, well, how long is the grieving process? Oh, it's a couple of days. It's this part. And it's like, yeah, well, whatever. We'll just. It's kind of like they just ignored them. So it's heartless, but it's kind of funny because it keeps true with the Empire's
yes.
modality. It's just like, look, this is who we are.
And it also serves a strategic part of the overall story because they're using this
now
to
they're
flush
using
out.
this now.
Yeah.
Andor, because they feel like, well, he's got to come back and see his mom,
right,
and hear about so that in that moment, that's when we'll get him.
Yeah, and these are the kinds of things I appreciate because these are very interwoven, multi-layered things that are going on in a seemingly mundane scene. And the flip side of that is Cyril, the one and only appearance we see of him in this episode, which, by the way, he was not eating cereal for a change. I noticed that this is the first episode where we don't see this guy like downing cereal, like Norman Bates while he's talking to his mom. But that was interesting too, because again, you see that Cyril now is still communicating with some of the boots on the ground people. I thought that scene was cool because you could see that he's closing in on Andor, and you could see, I think, where this is coming to a head, right? You're seeing Cyril doing his thing, Andor's doing his thing, and pretty soon, I think I have to think that it's going to be in the next episode. Sure, they could carry it over to season 2. I don't know if they really want to stretch that storyline out, although they might. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see what they're going to do because Cyril he's getting the information about what the Empire is planning on doing. And that seems to me like he's going to follow up with Deidre about that. That seems like where that's going to be the next path. And maybe at the end of this season, we're going to see those two kind of team up in whatever way they choose to do it, whether it's romantic or professional, or maybe a little bit of both or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's a possibility. Let me see. Oh, the other is it Petra? The other one, the lover of Val.
Cinta.
You have her character. Now she's over at Ferrix and she's kind of the barista over there, serving coffee and drinks. So we got to kind of wonder, like, what we still don't even know what her stake is.
No.
There as well.
No, we don't. But I did put in my notes, though, on that scene that at least it's starting to make sense. Because a lot of the stuff, the Aldani thing and everything was centered on Ferrix, and we knew that that's where Cassian, there's a lot of things that started there. And that's where Luthen even recruited and they were starting to do some stuff. I think she's there to basically see the aftermath. Like, okay, do they know what's going on? Are they connecting this to us in any way, shape, or form? That's what I think
she
is
kind of
happening.
reminds me of her position, and I'm just guessing, but she kind of reminds me of Face from the 18.
Yeah,
she's the one that blends in.
Yep.
She's coming to blend in, get the information, figure out what's going on, relays things to people like, okay, well, this is what they're talking about because I'm unassuming. I come off as very just mild and meek and just some chick that's just walking around, but really,
So does that make Luthen Hannibal and Cassian is BA and
Yep.
Yeah, I can.
Luthen loves when a plan comes together.
Look, that's totally valid, and it's funny because I actually had that in my notes too. Is that we're starting to see a little bit more of her. They kind of went back to Bix a little bit too. So I mean, they're starting to. I think with this, and this goes into David's point a little bit, that they were, in addition to something that I said earlier about how this episode seemed to focus on overall themes versus specific plot points, where it did focus on plot points, I agree with David. in the sense that it's a setup. It's setting up the true finale, which is the next episode. You know, this is the beginning. Okay, so let me get to again. Yeah, we're getting a lot here. Dwight says Saw realized that he is not a partner but a pawn in Luthen's strategy. Yeah, and I think that this is probably why, you know, you had to wonder, like, by the time of Rogue One, why was Saw so, I guess, disjointed from the rest of the rebellion? You know, he would reluctantly help them, and he was kind of fighting for the same cause, but he was doing it more like his own way. And I think that you're seeing a little bit of that. Just like, honestly, one of the other scenes that I thought was hilarious in this episode was when Luthen was selling out two tubes.
Oh man, that was priceless. The fact that he called them tubes,
I know.
That alone was hilarious.
I wonder if that was fan service.
I think it was. Honestly, I really do think it was, because that's what everybody called him too.
Yeah, everybody called him that. And he had a name. I mean, they released it, you know, when Rogue One was out or whatever. But yeah, the fact that he said that, and, you know, like, and he was just all like, but wait a minute, no, he's lying. That's not, man, that whole scene to me was just glorious. I thought that was one of the funniest things ever. Yeah, I thought that was awesome. And then, of course, David brings up something interesting. He goes, the part with the kids was creepy. This whole little cult thing. Great, but creepy. That scene is proof that her family suspects something. The daughter's gone snitch. See, I was wondering, like, when they were pledging, it almost seemed like this little group that she's a part of, with their little robes and all that little outfits or whatever, was almost like a Palpatine appreciation youth group or something. Like, not necessarily like Sith acolytes, but you know, like that youth corps kind of thing. Like, okay, we love the Empire. Palpatine is the greatest, and you know, like one of those kind of things. Like when they used to have the Nazi youth groups and V, the sci-fi series V and V: The Final Battle. One of the things that they did awesome in that was another allegorical, like, fascist Nazi thing, right? They come in peace and they go, hey, we're going to give you a bunch of technology and cures for a bunch of diseases. Reality was they were harvesting humans for food, and they had some sympathizers, and it's kind of like, okay, these guys are in charge now, so we're going to cozy up to them, that kind of thing. But then they also had a little visitor youth coalition or something. And they gave these kids, like, responsibility and uniforms and a little bit of authority and all that. And they had this old Jewish dude who, of course, had seen this before with the Nazis. So he was trying to warn people, like, hey, man, this isn't what it seems or whatever. And that's the vibe that I kind of got with Lita and her little friends that were all at the dining room table doing this weird little ritualistic thing.
Y'all look like Wednesday Addams or something.
Yeah, I mean, it was really bizarre, and I thought the same thing, you know, when I first saw that whole scene hit me as really out of place, actually, in this episode. Like, okay, what, you have never alluded to the fact that this chick was a part of anything before, and now all of a sudden she's, like, got this whole, like, 12 of her friends or something, and they got this little space coven thing going. I don't know. And then Ronaldo, he says, I felt really, really, really bad for that droid. Yeah, B took a hit. And he says, you know, I also felt bad for the mother, you know, the dead one and all. That's, I love that character. Yeah, you know, and I like the fact that they're not afraid to kill off characters in this whole thing. You know, that you shouldn't get too attached. Because you can see an argument.
I don't see a place for, but you really don't see, I mean, like, I don't really see her really moving the story too far anyway, given her position, you know, like being, I mean, unless they healed her and she got better, like, unless she was just motivation for Andor, you know, outside of that.
Well, that's
like,
what I'm saying. They could have killed her off in, like, season 2. And remember, she actually joined the rebellion. I mean, they could have spun this differently and had her be the one, the catalyst, that when Andor sees her dedication and all that she's kind of the tipping point. I'm not saying the sole reason, but the tipping point for him joining the rebellion. They could have spun it that way. So it's not like beyond the realms is what I'm saying. It makes sense from the story what they did, sure, but they could have done it that way. Dwight says, yes, I also believe all the major players will be on Ferrix in episode 12. It does seem like they're lining that up. Yeah, I definitely think that we're going to see everything is going to go down on Ferrix. You know, kind of like, all right, fight by the merry-go-round after school at 3 kind of thing. You know, it's, it's going down on the playground after school, kids.
Yep.
Ronaldo says his obsession with Andor and cleaning his image doesn't allow him to appreciate what his mom is doing for him. We're talking about Cyril, probably. That's an interesting perspective. I hadn't actually thought of that one because I think that they're characterizing the mom as sort of a overbearing, you know, browbeating him.
Tyrant.
Yeah, kind of belittling him. You know, almost a little bit of projection of her own failure in life and that kind of thing. So that's that's an interesting way of looking at it. Ronaldo says, by the way, poor Bix, that's what I call torture. And then, you know, Dwight basically picks that up by saying, yeah, Bix is going through it. And then Ronaldo follows that up by, and what makes it more scary is that we don't know what she heard. And that's what I love. I've always, it goes back to, and this really was like a budgetary equipment failure kind of thing, but it goes back to the original Jaws film. You know, the shark wasn't working, and I mean, you were actually supposed to see the shark a lot more in that film. But, you know, they couldn't get it to work, and is having problems, and they were already way over budget, so that's when they had the idea of, well, let's just write a scene where, you know, we shoot these like little flotation barrel things. And so then, when you would see the barrels, it's like it was what you didn't see that really creeped you out and got your imagination going. And because they couldn't get the shark to work, because like when they killed that little kid Alex Kintner on the raft, that was actually supposed to be way, way more over the top and bloody and all this other stuff. But they didn't do that, you know, or that whole iconic opening scene where, you know, the girl's out there swimming at night and she gets pulled under. I mean, it's so well acted by her too. It's what you don't see. And that's what I think is really effective in this too. Now your mind's imagining, what did she hear?
Yeah, I mean, the torturing of Bix, man, you know, it's just like, you got to wonder what she's going to be like on the other side of this. You know, like, okay.
Right?
Like, I'm sure she's probably going to, like, you know, probably in, you know, episode 12, episode 12, she might get rescued and she runs into Andor again, but it's like, she's probably so broken at this point. Like, what, you know, what is going to be her state of mind?
Yeah, I agree. And then, of course, we've got Ronaldo saying, I bet Mon's daughter and her friends become the acolytes in Rise of Skywalker.
Right.
You know what, man? I wouldn't put anything past, you know.
Especially in the sequel trilogy.
Yeah. Yeah, especially in the sequel trilogy. I agree. I think that, I don't know. Something else Ronaldo had said earlier, too. I didn't realize it was held for review. You gotta love the super sensitive nature social media is in right now. Ronaldo says, Cyril's a guy I just love to hate. And I think that's what it's designed to do, actually. You know, because Cyril, to a degree, he is kind of a sympathetic bad guy. But, you know.
Yeah, he's just trying to make his, I mean, really, when you really stop and think about it, I mean, he's just really trying to do his job.
Right.
It's just, and he just thinks that he's doing the right thing. And we have the objective viewpoint of seeing, like, okay, both sides of the spectrum, the rebellion and the empire. And, you know, that's what it makes, like you said, the theme of this series really is about sacrifice, because everybody's sacrificing on all sides, whether it's the Empire or the Rebellion.
Hmm.
And we're seeing it, play out right in front of us, of how that sacrifice motivates people, to get certain things done. And so in Cyril's case, you know, this guy's just trying to redeem his name. He wants to be back on top. He wants to be a good leader because he believes in the empire. He believes in what the cause. And unfortunately, he just drank the wrong Kool-Aid, But then on the flip side, you know, the rebellion, of course, they think they're doing the best thing, and I think everybody's paying a hefty price on that side as well. So that's why I really just love this particular style of Star Wars. Is you're really getting into, like we've always said, the everyday life, the okay, how are these events affecting everyday people, and what are they doing to do about what are they going to do about it?
Well, and I think that another thing that you have to look at as well, and it's easy to overlook this actually. Um, you have to look at the fact that this show, I think more than, even though some of the other, not just shows, but let's just say content, that'll include film or whatever.
Mhm.
Basically, I think that this show really does the most effective job. Again, even though some of the other stuff did really well at hinting towards this and bringing it up thematically, this one really gets to the heart of the Empire is actually the rightful government in this case. It wasn't like they took over from the Republic. They are the Republic.
Right.
Palpatine
That's
was the rightfully elected. They all said, yes, let's give this guy emergency powers. Now, of course, he did say, hey, when the threat comes now, I'll lay these powers down. So how do you keep them? You just keep making more threats, and that's exactly what he's doing. Now there's these rebels. But to the average citizen, the rebels are terrorists trying to threaten the peace and prosperity that the Empire is giving everybody. And now certain people that we happen to be following as characters are seeing the cracks. They're seeing some of the atrocities that the Empire is creating or perpetrating, and they're starting to see, oh, hey, maybe the Empire isn't the right side, and so that's what you're getting. Let's see. Let me go back to the chat for a second here, because David says, and you said you didn't think the family were moles. The daughter, maybe. Yeah. I mean, I guess. And to be honest, if it is, that would be cheap writing, I think. That would be the cliched thing to do. I don't think you have to go there. I mean, honestly, what you have is you have a daughter of a senator of a government that is the rightful government. And she's just kind of, as you said, Daryl, drinking the Kool-Aid. She just believes that they're on the right side, kind of like the husband does. And even more so than that, they just feel like, number one, the whole senator, that whole thing, it's ineffective. It doesn't mean anything anymore. From parents' perspective, I think he's prospering under the Empire, so therefore he supports the Empire. I don't think these guys are moles. They don't know, nor do they care what the Empire's doing. They're fine. They're rich. They're influential. They're powerful. They don't see it. They don't care. It's like, hey, these guys, I mean, we're doing well. So, who cares? They're not. You got to understand what a mole is. A mole is like, okay, I'm gonna infiltrate. I'm gonna do all this stuff.
Like that guy over,
yeah, like the driver,
at ISB.
Yeah,
Oh,
right.
the guy over at ISB, who's hanging with Deidre. That's
right. That's really what a mole. Now he's got a couple other comments here. He says, "I'm not sure what the last battle is going to look like in episode 12." I know. I'm right there with you, man. I really don't know. And he says, cheap. it's so fitting with the Nazi theme where kids were loyal to country over family. Yes, but the difference is that you have to, so you can make the argument that maybe not so much like the guy that's an ISB that's spying for the rebellion, right? That's a little bit different. You
Mhm.
could make the argument that maybe Leda is if they spin it kind of like they did with the driver. Hey, the senator might be up to terrorist activities. We want to see if that you could spin it like that.
Yeah, I think what's probably going to happen is that um they're on it's a house divided, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's one of those situations where we're for our empire, yet you are on part of the imperial senate, yet you don't seem to be supporting the
Mhm.
empire. Why?
Yeah.
And this is a problem. And it may even come up, like she may even just make mention, like, my own mother doesn't even support the empire, which I don't understand. Like she just made out of her frustration, and that once again turns eyes like, what do you mean your mother doesn't support it? Why? Who's your mother? Oh, Mom Mothman's your mom? Okay, well, let's delve a little bit more into her. Well, what have you seen her do? Well, she's always having these private meetings with so and so and so. Like, she may unknowingly be like, she might be dry snitching, as we would call it. But it's not like she's intentionally per se trying to snitch on her mom, but she's just frustrated because her dad, and he gets it. Why don't you, mom? Like, why are you fighting so hard? And it's making our lives a little bit more complicated, unnecessarily. If you just get on board with the empire, you know everything will be cool,
Which
but
is
you won't let it
way more
go.
realistic. That's way more
Yeah.
realistic, and that's my point. By a mole, that's like a more active spy kind of thing, and that's something that's done to death. That's why I called it cheap, because it is. How many times have we seen it? And really, if you look at their position, it's way more effective to kind of frame it like you did, or if they I guess at the higher ups in the empire, like a Palpatine or somebody, although they wouldn't, I don't think, pay attention to her. If
No.
it was like the ISB, I guess they would be the ones to do it, right? If
Yeah.
the ISB wanted, like, if they suspected Mothma of activity, which they clearly do because they got a driver that's spying, right? You
Hmm.
might try to go to the family because she's going to confide more in the family. She's going to be less guarded around the family. But reality is she isn't. She's hiding everything
Right.
from parents. She doesn't trust her own daughter. That's part of the whole tragedy of this family, actually. But
Hmm.
what you were talking about, I think, is actually a lot more. It's really more of, hey, you're complicating our lives. The Empire's great. Why are you doing this? Um, you're threatening our way of life because we're prospering under the Empire. We have influence. We have wealth. It's really not so much that they're about the Empire's cause as much they don't want their status to go away. They don't want their wealth to go away.
Hmm.
So to me, and that's more realistic. Sure, yeah, like
Yeah.
the Nazi kids, and yeah, I brought that example up, but you do have those gung ho, hey, I want to, I really believe in what these guys are doing. I want to serve, I want to, and I might turn against my own countrymen because of my newfound allegiance. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that isn't realistic. It's just not it's not the most common thing that you would see. The most common thing that you see, I mean, it's kind of how everybody votes today, even. What leader is going to preserve my way of life? What leader is going to keep my status intact? And,
Hmm.
it's that kind of thing. It's really more of a what you're not taking away versus what you're actually giving me kind of thing. And that's where I think that, and again, I mean, who knows? I mean, it's funny because David. He basically says, the daughter's a Zeta. But it's kind of funny though, but I mean that's sort of what it is, kind of like this weird, bizarre sorority though, you know? And I think again, it's such a random scene. In fact, the scene is so random that you know it means something.
Yeah, and the fact that she kept looking over, at her mom,
Yes.
like she's always looking at her mom, like, okay, mom, what are you doing? Even when she hugged Val, she's still like looking at her mom, like, okay, like what the heck is going on with you? So I don't disagree with David in the fact that yes, her daughter definitely suspects something, but I wouldn't call it like, but because of her loyalty to the Empire, if she ever found out, oh yeah, she probably would snitch
Oh, I'm sure she
because she
would
loves it.
snitch, but again, there's a difference though between a
But
mole and a
that
snitch.
mole,
That's
right?
really where I'm
Exactly, and that's
going.
what I'm saying.
That's what I'm calling
Oh yeah,
cheap.
I get it.
The mole thing is cheap. The snitch thing, well,
That makes a little bit
it
more
makes
sense,
more
especially
sense, but it is an
coming from a
overused
kid.
thing. It is, but it's still overused. It's like, why does everybody have to be? Honestly, most of the families would even be ignoring this stuff. Again, though, going back to the point that we were making, yeah, I mean, if it threatens your way of life, see, that's really where, and that's the other difference too.
Agreed.
It's not just the difference between the mole and the snitch thing. It's the difference in why you're snitching. It's not so much an active, I believe in this cause. It's really more of a, hey, you're doing something that could take away what we have, and that can't happen. So, now, a couple of things here. One of my favorite scenes, as I mentioned earlier, is that whole standoff between Luthen and the ships and stuff like that. And there's a couple of things. One little bit of a Easter egg for you guys. The Imperial ship that was pursuing them was a Cantwell-class arrestor, which was an early design for A New Hope. It was one of the ships that was actually designed for A New Hope, but Lucas opted not to use it. It actually made its debut in Solo, a Star Wars story. It was seen in the recruitment video for the Empire. And so I guess they decided, as an Easter egg and a little bit of a bone to throw to fans, they put that in there. But I love the fact that Luthen actually shows how good of a fighter, pilot, how cunning, and everything he is. You now understand, thanks to this scene, hey, this is why this guy is where he is in this whole rebellion thing. Why he seems to be the boots on the ground architect. Mothma, Bail Organa, those guys are kind of the networking leaders, right? They're bringing people to it. The person that's actually out there making it happen, that's your Luthens and your Saws and stuff like that. So, and then of course, finally in this episode, before we get to a wrap up and what we want to see in 12 and all that, for me, that final scene, which of course, I should put it up there because I had it up there, but this whole little final scene here, this was so reminiscent of Rogue One. And
it was. And
they keep doing this. There was another scene where he was kind of looking off on a beach or something like that. It's kind of like there's that, a recurring theme and foreshadowing, yes, where he was basically foreshadowing what happens to him in Rogue One. And I thought that it was really a cool thing, and it was really kind of a powerful ending too. So I thought that was cool. All right, so let's do overall thoughts, and of course, you guys that are watching this live, feel free to chime in as well. And while you're thinking about what you want to say, hit the like button if you're enjoying this video so far, or even if you're not, do it anyway. So what were your final thoughts on this episode?
Final thoughts. I thought it had some good moments. It had some moments that kind of were confusing and dragged a little bit. overall, I would give it a 7. I think it was, a solid. It was a solid enough episode. I'm really curious to see what how it sets up 12 and bring us to a close. So, um, highlights though was, of course, the Luthen battle with the Empire. Um, that was, rock solid. Uh, the conversations between Mothma and Vel, I really enjoyed that. And I'll probably say that the only other one that was really, honestly, that was kind of memorable was the B scene, like where just seeing how he was taking Marva's death, and it just,
Mm-hmm.
how despondent he was. And I can't, it's hard to say lifeless, because I mean, he doesn't have life, but that's how you look at those droids. You kind of look at them as people,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I thought they did that really well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna give it a little bit higher, 7.5.
Okay.
I I was actually flirting with the idea of an 8, 8.5, because I actually found myself enjoying this episode. I was lost in it. I thought it was really good. It had a space battle. It had, it felt a little bit more Star Wars-ish in certain respects. The Empire was
Okay.
still pretty brutal, which I thought was great. But again, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't. There were some issues. There were some parts that I could see that were dragging. There were some scenes that were placed that I thought maybe might have been shoehorned in there for the sake of setting up either the next episode or the next season. So we'll have to see. Ronaldo so far responds with his. He says, overall, I'll give it an 8.9. Wow, that's a really specific. I'm waiting for
Yeah, he
Ronaldo to
really,
go. Well, this one gets an 8.37 out of 10.
right.
He loved it. All right, so we got Ronaldo's vote. You guys still have about, I don't know, 30 seconds or a minute or so to pop your last texts in for the chat. Overall rating, some thoughts, final words, final will and testament. I don't know, whatever you guys want to chat in. You got about a minute to go here. So, yeah, I would say also favorite scenes, the Luthen scene. I really enjoyed the Saw scene as well, between Saw and Luthen. I thought that was really good. And, of course, the B scene where he was mourning Marva. David basically says it was a 7. This finale needs to have a fast pace like the episode they stole the money. I would agree with that. The action scenes to nail it like the Luthen scene. Exactly. I mean, if they actually did like that whole Luthen space battle scene, then Dwight. And Dwight gives it a 9.32. What's the matter, Dwight? It wasn't quite a 9.37?
Dwight is very exact.
Yeah. All right, so episode 12. And you guys in the chat, join in on this one too. So what do you need to see from the season finale? I mean, David kind of set us up a little bit with it. He basically told us what he needs to see from the season finale. He wants more action. And, he just wants a faster pace, I think, overall. And usually you and I do like 3 things or something that, we want to see. So, no pressure.
I want to see everybody kind of converge on Ferrix. And I think that needs to be like the climax of it all. It's like, okay, Andor kind of shows up, and but he may be prepared for certain things, and he makes a stand against the Empire. I want to see Bix get free.
Exactly. Away from the demonic headphones or whatever. Yeah.
Right, it's like,
I can see. Yeah, I know.
Beats by Pout, but
well, the thing that's kind of weird about that whole thing, though, is like, what you got to wonder why they continue to hold her. I mean, maybe they just haven't gotten everything they wanted, but I do agree with you that they do need to maybe wrap that up. I mean, what are they going to do? Just hold her forever and,
Right.
you know?
Right. And then I need to see Deidre. I need to see Deidre come in full fledged, full storm. That intensity that she can definitely bring, that gravitas that she brings to the screen. I want to see that.
Mhm.
And maybe even some standoff between her and like Andor, like, just now it becomes the cat and mouse thing. I kind of see her as a diet Thrawn in a way. Like, okay, she's trying to match wit for wit with him. Because she's
Mhm.
very intelligent, she's very, strategic. But Andor can be too, and he's great at improvising, on the fly as well. So I think that's what makes their ultimate, entanglement interesting.
Yep.
So, and then like I said, where does Luthen go from here now? Like Luthen and Mon Mothma, like I need to see how that is going to wrap up. So that's those are my things for episode 12.
All right. Well, I'll kind of start at the bottom and work my way back because you mentioned the whole Ferrix thing. So you want to see everybody converge on Ferrix. I would agree with that too, because I think that that's ultimately what's going to happen. I think that they're setting everybody up, obviously, to meet at a point, because everybody's
Mm-hmm.
kind of finding out pieces of the puzzle and just sort of moving closer together, right? But
Mm-hmm.
most notably, I need to see Andor get back there. I need to see him go back to Ferrix. And I had it as a form of a question in my notes. I said, well, will Andor go back to Ferrix? I think he's going to, because I think they've set that up, especially now that the Marva thing came up. I think that's a given.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree. I'm modifying that to a degree now because I think I agree with you that, yeah, I think that this is looking up to be the thing. And again, this rolls into my second point, but again, I'm working backwards here, and that's there were many potential confrontations. There were many confrontations that were set up. And it's kind of like what David had said earlier. What's going to be the thing? What's going to
Yeah.
be that thing what's the final battle going to look like? What is it? Where are they going with it? Because there's so many different things that were set up that I'm just wondering what's going to be the main confrontation for the next episode. That's definitely what I'm thinking.
Okay.
And then of course, I'm wondering if people are going to hit the like button. That's another thing. I mean, just got to throw that out there every once in a while.
Just saying.
Just saying, hitting the like button is a good thing. It actually helps YouTube algorithm, and it helps other people find our show. So if you guys are enjoying the show, help other people find the show. Hit the like button. It takes you like 2 seconds. But all kidding aside, well, I actually wasn't kidding, but back to the point. The other thing that I'm wondering, though, is will Cyril catch up with Andor? I say that because a lot of the things that were brought up by you in the chats, again, I'm going back to something that I said in the very beginning. They're setting some things up. This whole episode was about setups, which is why I think people
Mm-hmm.
like David, you to a degree, had some problems with it. It's because maybe you can make the argument that there was a little bit too much time dedicated to the setup. Maybe there were some things that were shoehorned in because of the setup. But whatever the case may be, this is definitely a setup episode. The thing is, though, what are they setting up for the next episode, and what are they setting up for the next season? Those are the two distinct things that you have to look at when you look at this. So, Cyril, I would think, would be the next episode because this whole thing has been this parallel advancement between you had Cyril's journey, you've had Andor's journey. Cyril is looking for Andor. The thing that set the Andor on this whole path was when he crossed paths with with those two, corporate sector authority guys and killed them, and then that got on Cyril's radar, and now you have, we were comparing movies and everything. Well, now there's almost a fugitive angle to this, right? The whole one-armed man thing. It's kind of like, okay, you basically have Cyril trying to hunt down Andor for the crimes that he committed against his men. So I can't help but think that that's a seasonal plot, not a series plot. So I think that that's going to happen. Okay, let's get to the chats because people have put in what they want. We start with Dwight. Dwight says, I can't wait to see what propels Andor into the rebellion. And then, of course, he follows that up with something that I had actually forgotten. He says, keep in mind there is a post-credit scene that is supposed to lead directly into Season 2. So, as far as the whole seeing what propels him in the rebellion, you're not going to see that in Episode 12. You're going to see that in Season 2. That's not a seasonal plot point. That's a series plot point. Because remember, this is a 2-season series. Got to say that slow. And it's going to end, as we all have discussed in the past, it's going to actually end with Rogue One. Like, it's going to butt right up against Rogue One, probably the same way. Wouldn't you agree that Rogue One butted up against A New Hope?
Yes. Indeed.
Mm-hmm. All right, Ronaldo weighs in. He says, look, I just want to see a coherent ending. Set the bar high, Ronaldo. That's a good idea when it comes to Disney Star Wars. And have a better idea how the rebellion will unite. Yeah, well, okay. You could actually see both of those. I mean, first of all, I have good faith that it is going to have a coherent ending. You can't say that this series hasn't been without issues, but I think it's done a really good job of giving us a more cerebral Star Wars, right? So I think you're going to get that. Now, whether or not you really see, I think you'll see a little bit of the rebellion uniting too, because I think that they're going to show how Saw and how Luthen and Mothma and maybe that Tay, what's his face, that senator guy that
Oh, her friend. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, her friend. I want to say Tay Biggs, but that's not it. Something like that though. Then we got David who's saying, everyone seems so spaced out that a final fight makes you wonder who will be in that fight. Or they could do like Avengers Infinity War and we have multiple battles. That's a good point too. They could do that. However, the only reason why I would say maybe not goes to Daryl's point, which is everything seems to be pointing to Ferrix.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I guess you could make the counter argument that you could have multiple battles on Ferrix. I mean, it's a big planet, right? I mean, there's multiple battles on Earth. Why not have multiple battles in Ferrix? And you could do that.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems, and I've been making this point during this whole show, it seems that everything is converging. I mean, the two things that I would say, if you had to sum up this episode, sacrifice and convergence. Those are the two overall things that I think that you're seeing when it comes to what this episode is setting up. So it could happen. Not saying it won't. I mean, hey, Disney, there have been some curveballs. I mean, all you have to do is go back to some of our older shows when we talked about what we think we're going to see in The Rise of Skywalker. Some of them turned out to be true. A lot of them didn't.
Others, not so much.
Yeah, way off. Like every other YouTube show that was doing the same thing. Dwight says, the rebellion, I thought, unites after the Gorman slaughter. Well, according to Rebels, anyway. So now we go into the little other danger of longer-running franchises, and that is that a long-running franchise does have a tendency to contradict itself from time to time. Had to throw the 3PO reference in there. Sorry, guys. So, and not even necessarily a contradiction, more of a retrofit, right? It's kind of a little retroactive storytelling. Like, we're just going to fix a few things, a soft reboot, And sometimes this is, again, I sometimes wonder, how closely does a story group, which, keep in mind, this is like their whole job, right? Their whole job is to basically keep the continuity and guide the stories that are happening among the whole franchise. And they don't always get that right. So we'll have to see. It could be another case that both are true, right? Because as you guys have said, who have chatted live with us, we're seeing part of what unites them. It's not necessarily the final thing. That battle might be where they actually unite. And in fact, something that has been said by Lucasfilm itself, really, the true final glue that did it was the Battle of Scarif. That's when the rebellion became the rebellion that we know of in A New Hope. Partially because A New Hope takes place like 3 days later or something. But I mean, there's also the fact that this is the thing. Because remember, during all of Rogue One, they were disagreeing on how to handle the news of the Death Star. Some people thought that it wasn't that big of a deal. That it was a lie, actually. Other people took it very seriously. So it really wasn't until the Battle of Scarif that you saw that true, hey, now the rebellion is what we know of the rebellion to be since Star Wars was introduced back in 77. So there could be multiple steps, is what I'm saying. You could have whatever happens in episode 12 is kind of pulling them a little bit closer together, where they're at least moving in the same direction if they're not fully one group. So we'll have to see. But again, it's not about us, it's about you guys. What did you all think of this episode? Give me your favorite scene. Put it in the comments section. You guys, if you've been watching the show, you see what everybody who's chatted in has thought. But we're interested in what all you guys who, are joining us later, after the live broadcast. What do you guys think? And while you're telling us what you think and you're watching the episode and you're enjoying it and you're thinking, man, how could I help these guys? How could I help them grow? They're so cool and they're so nice and they know their Star Wars, although they do forget names occasionally. How could I help them? Well, I'll tell you how you can help us. You can hit that like button and then hit the subscribe button, and you can personalize it. Hit the notification bell and you can get personalized recommendations. But generally speaking, we go live every Monday and every Friday at 8 o'clock. So you're always free to join us then. Monday, we are recording, what episode are we on, like 4? The 4th episode of Tales of the Jedi. Now here's the thing that's interesting. Most of the time, YouTube content creators don't put stuff like this out there. We have not gotten a whole lot of views on the last episode of our Tales of the Jedi review. So, I mean, we're basically committed, but I'm going to put a poll up on pretty much some of the animated shows or reviews or whatever. Our Andor reviews actually get a lot of views and a good response. But I don't want to really waste a number of weeks creating content that you guys don't want to see. I mean, there's really no point. I much rather would cover the stuff that you guys actually want us to. So you could actually leave in the comments section on this video if you want. I'll put a poll up in the community tab that you can respond to. And, maybe we can get a little bit better of a direction. But for those of you who are interested, Episode 4, Tales of the Jedi, is what we're going to be talking about on Monday night. So join us then if that's something that interests you. So until then, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.